The 1950s are sometimes called the good life. Let's explore some of the areas that were growing during the 1950s. Religion is growing during the 1950s. During the 1950s, we see church attendance very, very high in the Levitt towns and other new communities in the suburbs that are springing up. For some people in the 1950s, religion is seen as somewhat of an identifying feature for a person. This is especially important as the 1950s make America into a more homogenous society where everybody is trying to fit in. One way that you can still kind of stand out and not be an outcast is through your religion. It's a way to identify. I'm a Protestant. I'm a Methodist. I'm a Catholic. I'm Jewish. It's one of those identifying figures that's still accepted, is an accepted way of being different. However, religion in the 1950s is sometimes criticized as being too bland or too secular. Religion in the 1950s is seen sometimes as being more social than religious. One of the popular religious writers of the time is this man, Norman Vincent Peale, and he characterized religion in the 1950s as based on three things: faith, enthusiasm, and joy. And we see religion growing in all areas. There are more fundamentalist sects in America during the 1950s as well. So across the board, religion is growing. Education is also growing, and that's a direct result of the baby boom. Remember, that's the generation that begins with the prosperity from right around 1940. As the economy picks up in 1940, we see larger and larger families, more and more people having children, and more people having a large number of children. And as a result, the schools are overwhelmed. We see a 50% increase in the 1950s in the first 8 grades. School districts around the country need money with all these extra kids. So they ask the federal government for additional assistance. Eisenhower does not want to unbalance the federal budget. That's a primary concern for conservatives and Republicans. He also doesn't want to upset state control of education. So as a result, there is some federal aid, but very little federal aid early on provided for education. There's also a debate in the 1950s over traditional subjects versus new subjects. In some more affluent communities, parents want to see enrichment programs and things like foreign language taught. But these are too costly for other communities, and prices are rising for school districts as a result of the increasing numbers. Major changes in education occur in 1957 after the Soviet Union launches Sputnik, the satellite, into orbit. Sputnik directly leads to the American educational system moving away from the social goals of school and putting more of an emphasis on the learning basics, especially math and science. There is an agreed upon deficiency in American math and science that needs to be addressed by the school systems in higher education. This leads to the National Defense Education Act. Like almost every bill in the 1950s, it includes the phrase national defense, which directly leads to more math and science being taught in elementary schools and middle school and high school. It also leads to more financial assistance for college being available and even more money for graduate schools. We want Americans to catch up with Russian engineers and scientists and mathematicians, and we want to make that possible through the National Defense Education Act. And for the most part, it works, in part due to the GI Bill, which provided money for World War II GIs to go to college, and in part from the National Defense Education Act. College enrollment more than doubles from 1940 to 1960. Another area that grows is television. By 1957, we have the 3 main networks, NBC, ABC, and CBS. And across the country, we have over 500 stations. There is a television for every 4 Americans in the United States. So in other words, roughly a TV in almost every single house. The television directly hurts both radio and magazines, as more and more people are getting their information and entertainment from the TV. Advertising featured taped commercials, sometimes advertising things we wouldn't see today, like this commercial showing that more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Some popular programs of the era were soap operas, which were a direct growth from the radio dramas that were so popular on radio. A popular show that didn't last very long was Playhouse 90, which performed live dramatic plays about sometimes controversial issues and about ordinary people. Advertisers didn't want this kind of programming. They wanted programming that was exciting and that was glamorous. And this is what led to the popularity of quiz shows early on in television. Two of the more popular ones were the $64,000 Question and 21. But when a contestant on 21 named Charles Van Doren revealed that he had been given the answers in advance, that controversy really ended the quiz show popularity for some time. And the networks turned to a lot of the types of things we still see today: comedy programs, action programs, and drama programs. Two of the more popular shows that emerged were The Untouchables, about detectives in Chicago in the 1930s, and Bonanza, which was about farmers on a ranch.